Scholars point out here that this first stage of this downward spiral is what you could really call a sexual revolution. Notice, in the lusts of their hearts, they gave themselves over to impurity, that their bodies might be dishonored among them. I was born in 1959, and I was alive during the 60s and the 70s and saw firsthand the sexual revolution in this country. So were many of you as well. And then all of a sudden in the 1980s, things began to change, and there came something different. It was really what we could describe as a homosexual revolution. Look at the second God gave them over in verse 26. For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way also the men abandoned the natural function of the woman, burned in their desire toward one another, men with men, committing indecent acts, receiving in their own person the due penalty of their error. That's what we see today. It started in the 1980s. It continues today. I don't have to tell people in California about this, do I, with the Proposition 8, things that have taken place here. It's on every, sitcom that's out there. It's literally being pushed down people's throats in our country. There's been a sexual revolution. There's been a homosexual revolution. And then you'll notice at the very end of this whole passage that it says, not only do they do the same things, but they give hearty approval to those who practice them. Good becomes evil, evil becomes good. You can get on and say almost any kind of crazy sexual, sensual thing or have any lifestyle in the world and it's considered good. But when someone comes on and says that that's wrong and it's against the Scripture, that person is considered evil because they're considered to be intolerant and someone who doesn't have any love. Good becomes evil and evil becomes good. And that's what we see in our culture, this downward spiral. So when people say, when is God going to judge America? If you read Romans chapter 1, I think the only conclusion you can come to is He already is. He has already turned us over to our own sin, and we are suffering in our country the wrath of God's abandonment. And when people lose God, they lose themselves. You could say in a culture, as God goes within that culture, so man goes. And all the psychological confusion we see in our culture is because we have turned away from the living God and turned to our own way. And we've lost ourselves in doing so. Now, someone might say, well, how long is it going to be till this kind of judgment here turns into more direct judgment from God? Well, I don't know. Could there be revival? Could God's hand be stayed? Certainly there could. I don't know. I'm not God. But all I'm saying is what we see happening in our country now is the beginning of the abandoning of God of our country, turning us over to our own sin. And it's something sobering that each one of us need to consider. And we'll talk here in a little bit about what we do about this, because I don't want to just give the bad news and not talk about what we can do in response to this. Now, the next thing that could happen to make America reduced from being the world superpower is an event called the rapture. And this is one of these scenarios I'm laying out here. This is the one of these that's in the Bible. And this is the one that I think will ultimately be what will bring America down from her great superpower status. Now, I ran across this a while back on the internet. I like this right here, the rapture, the separation of church and state. That's when it's going to happen. It's going to be the separation of a lot of things, but it'll be the separation of that for sure. Think about the rapture of the church, though, what it's going to change. I mean, you think about that. I mean, it's incredible. Now, we all here today are pre-tribbers. Now, if you're not a pre-tribber, then this wouldn't apply, obviously. I like what someone used to say, I'm premillennial, I'm pre-trib, and I'm prepared. And I like that statement. That last one's the most important. But if the rapture is pre-trib, which is what we believe, then the church will be caught up. All the believers will be taken from this country. Now, I just put these statistics up there. They're kind of interesting. 85% of Americans claim to be Christians. Now, I like to call those cultural Christians. Basically, it's like a guy that I talked to when I was in law school. I asked him if he was a Christian. And he said, well, of course I am. What do you think, I'm a devil worshiper or something? I mean, that's what a lot of people's idea is. If I'm not a devil worshiper or an atheist or whatever, then I'm a Christian. 41% of the people in America claim to be born-again Christians, but 8% are identified as America's 32.5, or we'd be a lot better off than we are. But if you use the 8 to 10% numbers, the number of Americans who will disappear at the rapture, I mean, it's an astronomical number of people who will be gone from this country. This hit me a few years ago. I've had the privilege to go over to Turkey several times and go to the cities where the 7 churches of Asia were and to visit the places there. And I was going one night from Ephesus, modern-day Selçuk, on a bus back over to Izmir, which is ancient Smyrna, to leave there the next morning. And I was on this bus, and we were driving up around the edge of the city of Izmir. And Izmir is a Turkish city with a population of about 3 million people. And there's a pastor there of a church named Fikret Bocek, and he knows pretty much all of the evangelical Christians in Turkey. And in Izmir, there are about 300 to 400 believers. They're true believers in a city of 3 million. Now, I thought that night as I was driving along there, I'd been there all week, I thought, you know, driving along, looking down on this city of 3 million people, thinking about the fact there are about 300 or 400 people who know Christ in this whole city. It was a profound impact on my life that night. But I thought to myself, what would it be if the rapture happened right now in this place? They'd never even probably notice. You know, I'd look over and think that, you know, dumb American that was over there is gone, you know, or whatever. And a few people disappear from the city. It would be a blip on the scale in many parts of the world. But here in America, devastation. Some people have likened it to 1,000 Katrinas. I mean, I don't know how you could possibly put it into terms, but the rapture will change everything in America. You talk about change that's coming. I mean, you know, the rapture, I mean, it would change everything in this nation in which we live. And the rapture is an event that we're told in the Scripture could take place at any time. It'll take place in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. And I think that will be the ultimate final judgment of God on this country. Charlie Dyer says this. He says, can you imagine the effects on our country if over 28 million people, and this was back a few years ago when he wrote this, people in industry, government, the military, business, agriculture, education, medicine, communications disappear? That's approximately double the entire population of New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston all rolled together. The economic fluctuations of the 80s and even the Great Depression will pale in comparison to the political and economic collapse that will occur when our society suddenly loses individuals who are the salt and light. America could not support an army in the Middle East because the military would be needed at home to control the chaos. That's what will take place when the rapture of the church occurs.